For those of you paying attention as you walked in, I actually had a specific song playing. I'm not sure many people picked up on it. It was the Propeller Heads and Shirley Bassey singing History Repeating. And the reason I put that song on, because there's a line in the chorus which says, "It's all just a little bit of history repeating." Now, I won't even attempt to sing that because no one can croon like Shirley Bassey. But as we look back in history, this is very much a true statement. Certain things have a habit of repeating itself. Humanity is not great at learning from our mistakes. We seem to do the same thing over and over again. Whether you're looking at wars or depression, the Great Depression, or more local events like the sinking of Titanic, this is a situation that has occurred before time and time in history. And there are many other examples of this. Humanity makes the same mistake that other humans have done previously. We don't learn very often very well. Einstein is actually quoted as saying, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting a different result. Now, actually, Einstein didn't say it, but it's often attributed to him. And that statement is kind of true. If we always do what we've always got, we'll always get what we've always had. And so is true in relation to history. Well, here, Paul is trying to prevent that from happening. Paul is using the Old Testament stories of the way that God dealt with Israel and using them to hopefully encourage the church in Corinth to not make the same mistakes as the people in Israel did. He's kind of like, look at these stories. Now, don't do the same thing because you're in danger of doing it. That is where your temptation is heading and where you're looking at. He does so specifically in relation to the idea that the Corinthians had, that if they have been baptized and if they take the Lord's Supper, then they are good with God and they don't have to worry about sin. They don't have to worry about temptation. They can do whatever they want and it's okay. But that is not true of Israel, as we will see. That is not true of the Corinthian church, and that is not true of us. For we are all in danger of being tempted and we must be careful to work against that. Well, looking at the context, a couple of weeks ago in chapter 8, we were talking about how Paul had the problem of people eating, there were people eating meat sacrificed to idols. Some of you will remember this. And Paul was talking about the stronger brother, completely fine for them to eat it, but the weaker brother with the weaker conscience had a problem with eating it, and so he encouraged the stronger brother to not eat of the meat so that the weaker brother wasn't led into temptation, wasn't led into sin. Then in chapter 9, Paul kind of takes that as a springboard, this idea of laying down your rights for someone else. And he talks about how he laid down his rights in order to reach people for Christ. He showed how he did it practically. He talked about how, as Amora noted, that we need to be all things for all people. And then he talked about how we need to have self-discipline in how we run the race. And Paul himself noted that he didn't want to be disqualified at the end of his race for something, like the boxer who hits after the bell has rung. So that's kind of the context leading up to where we're at today. And today we're looking at chapter 10, the first half of it. And here he kind of goes back to the issue in chapter 8 of eating food dedicated to idols. And while it's not a sin, as he previously stated, he is aware of the temptation of that, leading them back into worshipping idols like Israel did, like Israel was tempted to do. See, there were Christians in Corinth who believed baptism, communion, I'm all good. Paul is saying, no, what didn't work for Israel, it doesn't work for you. The sacraments don't save you. The sacraments don't make everything good for your eternity. So then we get to the passage. History is often seen as dry and boring. And when I think of the mistakes that I made in high school, of which there is a handful, possibly more than one handful, I would never have dated Jade Sears, asked her out. That was a bad decision. It did not go well. But the second thing is I would have done history. Especially now as I'm a pastor, I think the history would have helped me so much in analogies and looking at the humanity and humankind. I think that would have been so much better for me. Instead, I chose geography and I learned about farming and volcanoes. But I kind of bought into this idea that history was boring, so we didn't need to know about it. And yet history is so important because we get to see the mistakes made by our forefathers and hopefully not seek to repeat them. And that's what Paul is doing here when he mentions stories in the Old Testament. He's going, look at what God did here. Don't make the same mistake that they did. And he does so by making the link between the Corinthian church doing baptism and Lord's Supper, communion, and showing how he links that back to the way that Israel did a version of that. They thought they were okay with God, but they were not. We see this in verse 1 to 4. For I do not want you to be ignorant of the fact, brothers, that our forefathers were all under the cloud, and they all passed through the sea. They were all baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. They all ate the same spiritual food and drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that accompanied them. That rock was Christ. Tricky passage. But what he's trying to do is showing that Israel did a form of baptism and Israel did a form of communion, and still Israel sinned and were dealt with harshly by God as a result. Now, if we break it down, verse 1, under the cloud and all passed through the sea. The cloud is a reference to while they were journeying to the promised land, they followed a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. At that time, obviously, they didn't have maps, they didn't have a GPS, but they did have a big arrow in the sky pointing them to where they should go. And so they were able to follow that, which I think would be much easier than looking down at your dash for every couple of minutes as you're driving. Then the next thing that he references is Moses' baptism as they walk through the sea. This is referring to the Red Sea. The Pharaoh and the Egyptians are coming after them. They've just left Egypt, just left slavery. They hit the Red Sea and they go, now what do we do? And Moses holds over his staff. The waters rise up and they walk on dry ground. And I can just love that experience. It's like Sydney Aquarium before Sydney Aquarium, where you're walking and there's like fish and sharks and marine life just either side of you as you're able to walk through it. And then, of course, the waters came down and Pharaoh and his army were destroyed. Then Paul so that for Paul is Israel's version of baptism. As they're starting their covenantal relationship as the nation of Israel, they went through a form of baptism. Then the next thing Paul links is in relation to the food and the drink, the way that God provided that for Israel. For they had food in Uber Eats style, delivered straight to their door in the form of manna and quail. And here he's linking that to the wine and bread of communion. Effectively saying Israel did a version of the sacraments. When I say sacraments, I mean baptism and communion and the Lord's Supper. So they did that, baptism, Red Sea, and they did the food and drink, God giving and providing them, including from a rock as God did. Okay? But despite all these blessings, despite these experiences of the Israel people, still they were led into temptation. Still they sinned, still they did what God told them not to do, and as a result, still they were judged. We see this in verse 5. Nevertheless, God was not pleased with most of them. Their bodies were scattered over the desert. Now remember here, the first time Israel got to the promised land, they sent out spies, right? So 12 spies went out, 10 of the spies came back and were like, we can't do this, man. We went in there and it's awesome because there's grapes the size of watermelons and it's so cool, but it doesn't work for us because they're giants, actual giants, Andre the Giant giants. And it's not like one of them, like in the WWE in the 90s, it's they're all giants. There's no way we can beat them. Let's go back to Egypt. This is not good for us. But there are two guys who are like, nah, we can do this. And Joshua and Caleb. And they're like, we can do this. Yes, they are big, but our God is bigger. We can take them. Let's go. As a result, God punished Israel. And all the people who left Egypt, apart from Joshua and Caleb and their families, died in the desert. For God told them to wander the desert for 40 years. And during that time, the Israelites, that first generation, that million of people who left Egypt, other than those two families, all passed away. So then Paul gives 4 stories of the way that Israel was tempted and stuffed up, despite their sacramental experience, despite these huge blessings from God. And there's 4 of them. First one, verse 7. Do not be idolaters, as some of them were, as it is written. The people sat down to eat and drink and got up to indulge in pagan revelry. If we can have the next slide, Yusuf. Now, this is a reference to Exodus 32, where Moses went up to Mount Sinai. He gets the 10 Commandments from God. God writes it down. He has the tablets. He comes down. And when he comes down, he sees Israel has pressured Aaron into building them a golden calf. Because they were like, nah, Moses isn't coming back. This isn't going to work. So here we go. Let's build a calf and we're going to worship that as God. Moses sees this, destroys the 10 Commandments. He throws them down in anger. God has to rewrite them. And as a result, Israel is punished. God sends a plague amongst the people, as well as that Levites kill about 3,000 people. The key point here is don't become idolaters. And don't worship an idol that is not God. Worship God and God alone. Don't put anything else on the number one pedestal of your life other than the one true God. Now, we in the modern world, we don't worship golden calves. We don't worship idols. We don't go to a temple as such, but we do go to sports stadiums. We do have a tendency to put our career as the number one priority in our life, or our family, or our home, or our sports club, or our car, or a better body. All of these become the idol of the modern Christian that is tempting for us to worship, as those around us do. But here, God is saying, look, that's what Israel did. It did not go well for them. Don't do that as well. Don't fall into that same trap. Don't become idolaters. Second story, found in verse 8. We should not commit sexual immorality, as some of them did, and in one day 23,000 of them died. This comes from Numbers 25, where Israelites were sleeping with Moabite women, and they encouraged them to start worshipping the Baal of Peor. God's anger burned against them, and in one day 23,000 people died. Key point, like the theme of the book, like we've seen multiple times in 1 Corinthians so far as we've gone through it, run away from sexual immorality. Keep sex inside marriage, not outside in any way. The third story is found in verse 9. We should not test the Lord, as some of them did and were killed by snakes. So this is from Numbers 21. Where the people were whinging about leaving Egypt, whinging about the bread, whinging about water, whinging about all the things that God had provided them. And so the Lord sent venomous snakes into the nation, and thousands died as a result. They had to look at a bronze snake in order to not die. And key point, don't whinge and grumble to God. Be content with the many blessings he has given you and trust him to provide for you as he has previously done. Then the last story is found in verse 10. And do not grumble, as some of them did and were killed by the destroying angel. This is a reference to Numbers 16, where a couple of guys go up to Moses and Aaron and basically attempt to stage a coup. The destroying angel, normally referenced, is the one who killed the firstborns in the plagues in Egypt, and there's no specific reference to that specific angel anywhere else, and so it's most likely that he's using that to refer to a generic punishment. But at that time, the land opened and people were sucked into it. God punished them because they were grumbling again, because they did not trust God, they did not trust the leadership that God had given them. The underlying point, even though they had the blessings, even though God had blessed them through escaping Egypt, blessed them through the plagues, blessed them through the Red Sea, blessed them through the manna and the quail and the water from the rock, still they were open to temptation, and still they sinned against God, and as a result were judged harshly. We see this in verse 6. Now these things occurred as examples to keep us from setting our hearts on evil things as they did. Paul is worried for the Corinthian church. Worried that they are setting themselves up for failure as the Israelites did, thinking that their past experiences of baptism and Lord's communion is enough to save them. But it is not. It does not guarantee them a relationship with God, and neither does it prevent them from being tempted towards sin. So then what do we do with this in a practical modern application? There was a mum who, at the church service where the last of her 4 children was being baptised, she took her handkerchief out, she wiped her brow, she sighed a deep sigh of relief and said, "At last, they're all in the church and I can stop worrying." And the pastor was looking at her going, "No, this is when you start." Baptism does not signify the end of the Christian journey. Baptism is a mark of the beginning of the Christian journey. For those teenagers still have to go through the dangerous transition between high school and independent young adult life, where the church historically loses scores of people to the temptations of the world. Those kids don't just make one decision for Christ, they must make a decision every day for Christ, putting Christ first, continuing in their relationship with God, strengthening and maturing. It is not just all done at baptism, and yet that is the lie that Christians can buy into, for that is definitely the lie that the world buys into. As I have conversations with those outside of the church, it's interesting when you talk about religion, and because they often will say, "Well, you know, I was christened as a baby. I went through communion. I went through confirmation. I took my first communion, or I got baptized. So of course I'm good with God. I did that thing once when I had no choice in it. So I'm good with God, right? I did that. Look, in my high school experience, I got baptized. I was in an evangelical church. I got baptized. So of course I'm good with God, right? Well, no. You are in very much danger of Christ saying, "Depart from me, I never knew you." It is not one decision and I'm saved, and we must never buy into that lie. It's interesting when you look at the 2016 census, in terms of religious affiliation, still, even like in 2016, and I'm sure it's gone down, but it'll still be over 45% of Australians still affiliate with a Christian denomination. They may never go to church. They definitely don't open their Bible. But because of a past or family link to some kind of church, they believe they and God are good. It's fine, I got baptized. It's fine, I got confirmed. It's fine, first communion, we done. But that is not fine. For we must never put our faith in religion. Religion doesn't save. We must never put our faith in communion or baptism. Communion and baptism doesn't save. There's only one who does, Jesus Christ. Yes, great, you've been baptized, fantastic. Yes, great, you come to church, you take the Lord's communion, fantastic, really excited, well done. When are you opening your Bible? How's your relationship with God going? Do you know Jesus? Nominalism is still present in Australia, though it's much bigger in America, but nominalism is this idea where I can go to church and so I'm good. But no, do you know Jesus? There are many in the church who will be shocked on the day where Christ returns because they think they're good with God and they aren't, because they've trusted religion, they've trusted attendance, they've trusted baptism or communion when they should have been trusting Christ. So that's the first half of the passage for today. Don't trust religion, trust Jesus. But the second part is then Paul kind of turns and looks at temptation. And we have to remember that at the end of chapter 9, Paul was worried that he himself would be disqualified from the race because of something he does at the end. Like I said, like the boxer who hits after the bell has gone. And so Paul then expands on these concerns that he's not just worried about this happening for him, he's worried about this happening for the church in Corinth. Verse 12. So if you think you are standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. There is a seemingly endless supply of gifts under the category of celebrating too early. I looked this up this week. We're going to look at the first one. This is a bike race. The guy thinks he's won. He's putting his hands up, and then this guy from second just races and steals it from him, and he loses the race. Another example of this is soccer. There's a penalty kick out. He kicks. The goalkeeper saves the goal, starts to celebrate, and the ball spins into the goal, and that is a goal for the opposing side. He thought he had it, he was so excited, and he does not have it. As a result, he's been possibly lost. The last one is the golf. He does an amazing putt. It's just about to go in. He throws his club, and it does not end well for him. There is this idea in all of these, and there is a surprising amount of them, that before the race is finished, before the event is over, there is a celebration, there is pride, there is look at me, how awesome am I? And as a result, they lose time after time after time too soon. Time after time, there's so many of these. I was shocked how many there are. There is this arrogance that some in the Corinthian church were experiencing, and it relates to this. But that they think that they are saved, fine, don't have to worry about it. Put it on the back burner. My relationship with Jesus, don't worry about it. I got baptized, don't worry about it. I've had communion, don't worry about it. Yay, us! Now I'll go and do whatever I want. And Paul's going, no, you're celebrating too early. You can still be tempted. There is still a problem here that you need to work against. Another example of this is Rocky 3. This is before the Rocky series hit the heights of Rocky 4 versus Ivan Drago. No, this is Mr. T, who pities the fool. In Rocky 3, at the beginning of Rocky 3, he's the champ. He's doing really well, but he's lost the eye of the tiger. He's lost the hunger for the fight. He got civilized. So he has a match against Mr. T, who his coach tells him not to take, but he takes it anyway. And as a result, but during training, he's distracted. His heart's not really in it. He's not focused. He buys into his own PR. And as a result, he gets beaten soundly by round 2 by Mr. T. Pride leads before a fall. Then Rocky, of course, as is the genre, he gets his head in the game. He reclaims the eye of the tiger, cue the training montage with Apollo Creed, and reclaims the title. But this complacency, this sense of entitlement that Rocky had at the beginning of the movie, this perception that he is untouchable, that Rocky can't be beaten, is very true for the Christian. Smug complacency tends to mire Western Christianity. We think we got this, we don't have to worry about temptation. We got this, we don't have to worry about sin. We got this, we don't have to worry about questioning our relationship with God with fear and trembling. We can get civilized and no longer consider our salvation. We get civilized and think nothing can touch us. We get civilized and our heart no longer breaks for the sin in our life. This is the danger that Paul is warning the Corinthian church about. This is the danger that we must be reminded of too. Don't get too cocky and fall under God's judgment through sin. Watch out. Stand firm. Be careful. Take heed. Then Paul talks about how in relation to temptation, he has another 2 key points. And that is common to everyone. We see this in verse 13. No temptation has seized you except what is common to man. This term temptation in context can also be understood as the term trial. And here Paul has kind of 2 ways of looking at this. To the Christian who feels that they will never face temptation, that they will never face trial, Paul is clear, you will. If you haven't yet, you haven't lived long enough. Temptation and trial are common to everyone. Everyone will experience them. Everyone will go through them. You are not immune to this. But there's a flip side to that. To the Christians, he is also addressing Christians who are going through a tough time and thinking that they are experiencing something unique. This is only me. Only I have ever experienced this. Only I have experienced this trial. Only I have experienced this temptation. And yet Paul is reminding them, no, this is common. You're experiencing what others have through the history of time, what others have even right now in your church. You are not going through it alone. There are others struggling with this same thing with you. One of the most encouraging things that you can do when you're sharing with a friend and you hear them going, yes, I struggle with that too. Yeah, I'm not alone. It's not just me. It's you as well. Fantastic. Let's work through this together. For that is what Paul is encouraging in relation to temptation and trial. But then this can't be divorced from the second part of verse 13. And God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, he will also provide you a way out so that you can stand up under it. So another 2 points here. The first is not more than you can handle. God will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. If I go and see a good personal trainer, on the first day, he's not going to get a barbell, 150 kilogram barbell and expect me to deadlift it. He's not going to do that, okay? That's a bad decision. What he's going to do is he's going to start me with a 10 or 20 kilogram barbell. And I'll do these ones a couple of times, and then as I progress, I'll work up. According to Google, in relation to my weight, apparently I should be able to lift 170 kilogram barbell. That ain't happening on the first week of training. That ain't happening on the first month of training. That's likely not even happening on the first decade of training. He's got to work me up to that, right? And so the good personal trainer won't start me on something that I cannot lift. He will give me something that I can lift. God is the good trainer. He won't give you more than you can lift. He won't put you under a temptation or a trial that you can't, with his help, stand up under. You will be able to bear it. You will be able to sustain. You will be able to endure. He won't give you anything that you can't do so with. God knows you. God knows you better than you know yourself. God knows what you can handle and what you can't handle. You know those moments when you do something that you didn't think was in your ability and you stand back a little bit afterwards and you go, wow, I can't believe I did that. God knew you were going to do that. So of course he's the best one to judge what you can handle and what you can't. And of course he's not going to let you endure something that you're unable to endure with his help. There's nothing any of us will face in life that will be so overwhelming that we can't handle if we do it with God. And then there's another point here, verse 13c. But when you are tempted, he will always provide a way out that you can stand up under it. There is a new thing out there called escape rooms. This is like a group activity that you do with your friends. It's like bowling or karaoke. You go into a room and there'll be clues and everything you need to escape the room. It might have a lock on it or a special code or something. And everything you need to escape the room is in that room. Okay? There is a way out that doesn't involve pushing the panic button or throwing the chair through the window. There is a way out of this room, right? You just need to figure it out. And so you're talking with your friends, you work at it, you think it through, and the goal is that you're able to get to the place where you're able to work out how to actually escape the room. And a lot of people can do it, and a couple of groups get very frustrated and start picking up the chair. But for the most part, there's a way out. Well, in the same way, temptation is like the escape room. God always gives you a way out. There's always an escape route. There's always a path that if you follow in relation to him, with him, in help with him, in affiliation with God, that you can get out of the temptation, that you can get out of the trial that you're currently enduring. Nothing is so bad that it has no answer in relation to this. And why does God only give you what you can bear? Why does God always provide you with an escape route? It's because God is faithful. See, God was faithful for his people in Egypt, faithful when they were in slavery. God was faithful when Pharaoh said no, faithful in his hesitancy. God was faithful when Israel was trapped in front of the Dead Sea. God was faithful when there was hunger, faithful when they were thirsty. God was faithful when they were disobedient, faithful when they were grumbling. God was faithful when they were upright, faithful when they were stumbling. God was faithful with Israel in temptation and trial. God is faithful to us all the time, all the while. God is faithful. And so we can go through temptation, we can go through trial, because we have a faithful God who will never leave us and never forsake us, who allows us an out, who never gives us more than we can bear. We can take this stuff on because God is with us. When we look at history, the church has made many, many errors. When we look back at our lives, we have made many, many errors. But the goal is that we don't just make the errors and learn nothing. The goal is that we learn from our mistakes, learn from Israel's mistakes, and we grow. We don't worship idols. We don't fall into sexual immorality. We don't grumble. We don't think that because we have religion, we are saved. And as a result, when we head towards temptation and trial, we remember that God is faithful Just as he was with them, so he is with us. Please, will you pray with me? Lord, we praise you. We praise you because you are faithful. We praise you because you don't give us more than we can handle, because you always provide an escape route. We praise you for this. We praise you that we can learn from the past mistakes. We praise you that we have Jesus. Our salvation is secure. Help us, Lord, not to believe the lie that the Christian sacraments, that one experience of God 20 years ago is enough. Help us to continue, Lord, to lean on you, lean in you, open the word, search for you, because you have promised us that when we do, we will find you. We thank you for Christ. We thank you that he is the only one who can save us. We thank you for you, that you are faithful in temptation and trial. In your name, amen.